The blood was still fresh on the concrete floor when Harper Mitchell parked her worn-out Honda Civic in front of the abandoned warehouse. She didn't see the bodies being dragged inside minutes before, didn't hear the gunshots muffled by professional silencers, didn't notice the men in dark suits disappearing into the shadows like ghosts. All she saw was the address glowing on her cracked phone screen, the $300 order that would pay half her overdue rent, and the silent promise that this would be the last delivery of the night before she could finally collapse into bed and study for the anatomy exam that could determine whether she'd continue in medical school or become just another statistic of abandoned dreams in Detroit. She grabbed the thermal bags from the back seat, feeling the weight of the expensive Chinese food that someone had ordered to an address that was clearly not residential, and walked toward the rusted metal door without imagining that the next 20 minutes would completely transform her life. She knocked 3 times, waited, knocked again. The door opened just a crack. A tattooed hand snatched the bags without a word, without a tip, without even a thank you, and slammed the door in her face with enough force to make the metal vibrate. Harper stood there for a second, processing the rudeness, but she was too tired to care. She turned and began walking back to her car when she saw it. All 4 tires were completely slashed, torn with surgical precision. The windows were shattered into 1,000 pieces glittering under the weak light of the street lamp. The rearview mirror had been ripped off and thrown on the ground. Someone had destroyed her car while she was making a 5-minute delivery. Hello, this is Rachel Ashwood, and this is a fictional content narration created for entertainment. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel so it can reach more people. Leave your like, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Harper felt panic rising up her throat like boiling water, burning every inch until it overflowed into a silent scream that she swallowed forcefully. She looked around desperately, searching for security cameras, witnesses, any sign of civilization. But this part of Detroit had been abandoned years ago. Buildings with broken windows watched her like empty eyes. Streets without lighting stretched in all directions like dark veins. And the silence was so heavy, she could hear her own heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and discovered there was no signal at all, just that empty circle where the connection bars should appear. She tried dialing emergency anyway, but the call didn't even initiate. She was completely alone in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city, at 2 a.m, without transportation, without communication, without help. The first tear began to form in the corner of her eye when she heard the sound of a powerful engine approaching, purring low like a satisfied predator. Harper froze, every muscle tensed, prepared to run even though she didn't know where. A black SUV emerged from the darkness, windows so dark it was impossible to see who was inside, chrome shining under the moon like liquid metal. The car slowed down as it passed her, then stopped completely a few meters away. The engine remained running. No one got out. Harper held her breath, mentally calculating if she could run faster than whoever was in that car. The answer was probably no, but she would bend her knees and try anyway if she had to. The driver's door finally opened and a man stepped out with the calm of someone who owns the entire world. He was tall, easily over 6'2", with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his impeccably cut dark suit. Black hair combed back revealed a face of hard lines, square jaw covered by stubble that only increased the impression of controlled danger. But it was the eyes that made Harper take an involuntary step back. They were an icy green, the kind of green you see in deep lakes where things sink and are never found again, and they studied her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. He didn't say anything immediately, just observed her standing next to the destroyed car, thermal bag still hanging from her shoulder like pathetic evidence of normalcy in a completely abnormal situation. Kieran O'Malley had left that warehouse less than 10 minutes ago, after personally putting a bullet in the head of a traitor who thought he could steal from him and live to tell the tale. His hands still had gunpowder residue under his perfectly trimmed nails, his pulse still throbbed with the adrenaline of recent violence, and his mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning the next move on the infinite chessboard of power and betrayal that was his life. He didn't expect to find a potential witness, especially not one wearing a food delivery uniform and having huge brown eyes full of fear that she bravely tried to hide. Her car was destroyed, which meant his men had seen her arrive and assumed she was a threat, which meant she had delivered food exactly when she shouldn't have been there, which meant he had a problem. But as Kieran studied her, noticing the way she kept her chin up despite the obvious terror, the way her fingers closed into fists as if preparing to fight even though she clearly stood no chance, something unexpected happened. He got curious. How many people looked at Kieran O'Malley and didn't run immediately? How many women could hold his gaze for more than 3 seconds without trembling? This girl, this food delivery driver who probably earned less in a month than he spent on a bottle of whiskey, was standing there shaking but not fleeing, scared but not hysterical. And there was something in that combination of vulnerability and strength that sparked interest, where there should only be cold calculation about how to eliminate evidence. He took 2 steps toward her, moving with the lethal grace of someone trained in combat since adolescence, and saw when she prepared to run. But she didn't run. She just stared at him, waiting, and Kieran felt the corners of his mouth curve into something that wasn't exactly a smile, but was dangerously close. Finally he spoke, and his voice was low, carried with an Irish accent he had never completely lost, despite 15 years on American soil. Problem with the car? The question was absurd considering the obvious state of destruction, but he wanted to see how she would react. Harper blinked, processing the surreal situation of making polite conversation with an intimidating stranger in a dangerous alley at 2 a.m. Every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous, that she should make up an excuse and disappear. But where exactly would she go? Someone thought my tires deserved a creative redesign, she responded, surprised by her own voice coming out steady despite her racing heart. Unfortunately, I can't afford the artistic repair. Kieran tilted his head slightly, reassessing. Sense of humor under pressure. Smart enough not to panic completely. Observant enough to maintain safe distance, but not retreat cowardly. Interesting. Very interesting. And extremely problematic, because now he couldn't simply eliminate her, as would be standard procedure. Not when she made him feel something beyond the calculating emptiness that had governed every decision for years. Need a ride? He made the offer casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to offer transportation to a stranger in clearly suspicious circumstances. Harper looked at him, then at the gleaming SUV, then back at her mutilated Honda, doing the survival calculations quickly. Staying there was dangerous. Accepting a ride from a stranger who appeared out of nowhere was potentially more dangerous. But there was something in the way he observed her, not with predatory malice but with genuine curiosity, that made her medical intuition trained in reading people decide that the calculated risk was worth more than the certainty of danger in remaining. "Where are you going?" she asked, testing, wanting to see if he would lie or be direct. "Wherever you need to go," Kieran responded, and Harper realized he had thrown the decision completely back to her. Smart, controlling, accustomed to having power in every interaction. She should have said no, should have invented that someone was coming to get her, should have run in the opposite direction screaming. Instead, she adjusted the bag on her shoulder and walked to the SUV before the fabricated courage could disappear. The car interior was more luxurious than any place Harper had ever been. Soft leather that probably cost more than an entire semester of college, digital dashboard glowing softly, and that unmistakable smell of money and power that she only knew from afar. Kieran entered the driver's seat with fluid movement, closed the door, and suddenly the space seemed much smaller, much more intimate, much more dangerous. He didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he turned to look at her directly, and Harper felt the full weight of that attention like physical pressure. "Name?" he asked, and it wasn't a request. It was a soft but undeniable command. Harper Mitchell. She didn't know why she was giving her full name to a stranger, but lying seemed stupidly useless at that moment. "And you are?" Kieran smiled for real this time, a small and dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. Someone you definitely don't want to know, Harper Mitchell. He said her name slowly, savoring each syllable, and she felt a shiver run down her spine that wasn't just fear. But since you're in my car, you can call me Kieran. He finally started the engine and began driving, leaving that decayed industrial area with the confidence of someone who knew every street, every shortcut, every black hole where things disappeared in Detroit. Harper gave the address of the tiny apartment she shared with 2 college roommates, and Kieran just nodded, not asking questions, not commenting on the neighborhood that was only marginally better than the place where they had met. For a few minutes they drove in silence, and Harper took the opportunity to study him discreetly. His hands on the steering wheel were strong, with old scars crossing the knuckles, the kind of scar that came from punching things or people repeatedly. He wore a watch that probably cost more than her car when it was new, and there was a constant tension in his shoulders, as if he were always prepared for violence even in calm moments. "So, Harper Mitchell who delivers food at 2 a.m, Kieran said finally, breaking the silence without taking his eyes off the road. "Student?" It wasn't really a question, more a statement he wanted confirmed. Harper hesitated, instinct saying not to share personal information, but what difference did it make at that point? "Medical school, 3rd year. She saw something pass quickly across his face. Maybe surprise, maybe respect. Hard to tell with that controlled mask he wore. Medicine. Ambitious. There was genuine approval in his voice now. "And you deliver food to pay for it. Scholarships cover tuition. They don't cover life." Harper responded with more honesty than she intended. "Some of us don't have the option to just exist. We need to work for every cent." She didn't know why she was being defensive, but there was something in his obvious opulence that made her own situation seem even more precarious. Kieran was quiet for a moment, processing. He had been born in Dublin into a family that had 2 options: crime or perpetual poverty. They chose crime, and he was trained from childhood to be ruthless, strategic, lethal. He worked his way through blood and betrayal to the top of the hierarchy, building an empire that extended across 3 states. Money had never been a problem for him, not since 16 when he made his first big job. But he remembered the hunger, remembered watching his mother choose between paying rent or eating, remembered the feeling of helplessness that transformed him into the man who wasn't afraid to take what he wanted. This girl, this future doctor delivering Chinese food in dangerous neighborhoods to survive, she had that same fierce determination he recognized. And it fascinated him. "Why medicine?" he asked, genuinely curious, something rare for someone who rarely cared about other people's stories. Harper looked out the window, watching Detroit pass in blurs of weak lights and decayed buildings. "My younger brother had severe asthma. We didn't have money for proper treatment. He had an attack when I was 15, and I didn't know what to do. I just stood there watching him struggle to breathe until the paramedics arrived." Her voice was low, loaded with old guilt. "He survived, but I swore that day that I would never feel that powerless again, that I would learn to save people." The intensity in her voice made something strange happen in Kieran's chest, something like admiration mixed with recognition of someone who had also made life choices based on defining moments of trauma. He killed people. She wanted to save them. 2 opposite sides of an impossible coin, and yet he completely understood her motivation. "Noble," he said finally, and there was no sarcasm in the word. Harper turned to face him, really face him, and for the first time allowed herself to acknowledge that the man driving was absurdly handsome in a dangerous and forbidden way that made her stomach turn in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "And you?" she asked, knowing she was crossing a line but unable to stop the curiosity. "What do you do, Kieran without a last name, that allows you to drive a car worth more than the entire building where I live?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Kieran could lie, should lie, but there was something refreshing in her direct honesty that made him want to reciprocate, even if only partially. "Import and export business," he said, using the standard cover that technically wasn't a lie, considering he imported and exported various things, most of them illegal. And some commercial properties around the city. Harper nodded slowly, and Kieran noticed in her eyes that she didn't completely believe him, but was smart enough not to press. She had caught the subtext, read between the lines, and decided that not knowing the details was probably safer. Smart. Very smart. They turned onto a street Harper recognized, just a few blocks from her apartment, and she felt something unexpected. Disappointment. The ride was ending, and she would probably never see this mysterious and dangerous man again, who had appeared out of nowhere and saved her from a potentially terrible situation. It was better this way, of course. He was obviously involved in something illegal, probably dangerous, definitely outside her reality. But as the car glided smoothly down the street, she couldn't ignore the way her heart accelerated every time he looked at her, or the heat that spread through her body when his fingers accidentally brushed hers when he adjusted her seatbelt earlier. It's that building. She indicated a set of discolored apartments that had seen better days decades ago. Kieran parked in front, but didn't turn off the engine. He turned to her, and the tension in the car became so dense that Harper could feel it against her skin. "Your car," he said finally. "Someone will tow it tomorrow and fix everything. It won't cost you anything." Harper blinked, processing the absurd offer. "I can't accept that. I don't even know you. And clearly that will cost thousands of dollars." "You were there because of me," Kieran said, and it was the closest truth he could give. His men had destroyed her car because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a wrong place that was only wrong because he had transformed it into a crime scene. Consider it compensation for inconvenience. Inconvenience, Harper repeated slowly, almost laughing at the inadequacy of the word to describe the completely insane night she had experienced. Right, because having your car destroyed is just a small inconvenience. But even while protesting, she knew she had no way to refuse. She didn't have money to fix the car, and without a car she couldn't work, and without work she couldn't pay rent or food or continue in college. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you," she said finally, the word coming out reluctant but sincere. "Seriously, thank you for not leaving me stranded there and for this." Kieran just nodded, but his green eyes studied her with an intensity that made Harper feel as if he could see right through her, read every thought, every fear, every secret desire she barely admitted to herself. "Be careful with the deliveries you accept," he said softly, but there was steel in his voice. "Detroit at night isn't safe for brave girls who don't know when to be afraid." "I was afraid," Harper admitted. "But fear doesn't pay bills." She opened the car door, feeling the cold night air against her heated skin, and hesitated. She turned to look at him one more time, memorizing the angular face, the impossible eyes, the feeling of danger and attraction that emanated from him like heat. "Will I see you again?" The question came out before she could censor it, vulnerable and exposed. Kieran smiled that small and dangerous smile. "Not if I'm doing my job right," he responded. And there was promise and threat mixed in the words. "But Detroit is a small city for people like us, Harper Mitchell. Our paths might cross again." It was goodbye and possibility at the same time, and Harper had to accept it. She got out of the car, closed the door, and watched the black SUV disappear into the night as if it had never existed. But as she climbed the stairs of the building toward the apartment, Harper couldn't get Kieran out of her head. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, studying, and attempts not to think about the mysterious man who had invaded her life for 30 minutes and then disappeared. On the third day, Harper came down in the morning and found her Honda Civic parked in front of the building, completely restored. New tires, new windows, impeccable bodywork, and when she opened the door, the interior had been completely cleaned and smelled like a new car. On the steering wheel was a thick envelope. With trembling hands, Harper opened it and found $3,000 in cash with a simple card that said only, For lost deliveries and expenses. Don't thank me. There was no signature, but she knew exactly who had done it. And as she counted the money that represented 2 months of brutal work, Harper felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Gratitude mixed with curiosity, attraction mixed with fear, and the undeniable feeling that her life had just gotten complicated in ways she didn't completely understand yet. She should have stayed away, should have forgotten that night, used the money, and moved on. But Harper Mitchell wasn't a person who ignored mysteries, and Kieran O'Malley was the most dangerous and fascinating mystery she had ever encountered. 2 weeks later, Harper was in the middle of a shift at the university hospital where she interned when an emergency arrived. Man in his early 30s, multiple gunshot wounds, losing blood rapidly. The medical team rushed to stabilize while Harper, still just a student, observed from the margins taking notes. When they managed to tear the patient's shirt to access the wounds, she saw the distinctive tattoo covering his ribs, an Irish clover intertwined with symbols she didn't recognize, but that emanated gang significance. The man was semi-conscious, murmuring in heavy Irish accent, and among the groans of pain, Harper caught a name. Kieran. He was calling for Kieran, begging for someone to warn Kieran O'Malley that the ambush had been a trap. Harper froze, pen stopping in the middle of the note. Kieran O'Malley. The full name of the man who had saved her, confirming what she already suspected, but didn't want to admit. He wasn't just someone involved in questionable business. He was important enough to have men working for him, important enough to be the target of ambushes, important enough for a man on the verge of death to scream his name as a last hope of salvation. The resident doctor supervising turned to Harper abruptly. "Mitchell, go to the reception and check if there are family members or emergency contacts for this patient. His name is Liam Brennan." Harper nodded automatically and left the trauma room, mind spinning. She knew things now, information she probably shouldn't have. She knew that Kieran was involved in something violent enough to result in shootings, knew that someone was trying to harm him, knew that this Liam had survived but was in critical condition. The question was, what would she do with this information? The sensible answer was nothing. Keep her head down, do her work, forget everything. But Harper discovered that sensible and possible were two completely different things when it came to Kieran. She finished her shift at 10 at night, exhausted but restless. She picked up her phone and looked at the screen for 5 full minutes before admitting to herself what she was about to do. She didn't have his number, of course, but she had the car he had fixed, and she had the address where it all began. 30 minutes later, Harper was parked in front of the warehouse where she had delivered food that fateful night. It looked even more threatening now that she knew for sure crimes had happened there. But she waited, engine running, prepared to drive off in a flash if necessary, betting on the absurd chance that Kieran still used this location for business. She didn't have to wait long. The same black SUV appeared 20 minutes later, followed by 2 other cars. Men got out, all armed, all with the same clover tattoo Harper had seen on Liam. And then Kieran emerged from the SUV, and even at a distance Harper could see the lethal tension in every movement. He was wearing dark jeans and a black shirt, more casual than last time, but somehow even more intimidating. He was in the middle of giving orders when one of the men pointed to the obviously out-of-place Honda Civic parked on the street. Kieran turned, looked directly at her car, and even through the distance and darkness, Harper felt the impact of that gaze. For 3 seconds that seemed like eternity. They just stared at each other. Then Kieran said something low to the men around him, and they all immediately retreated, getting into the cars and driving away until only he remained. He walked to the Honda with measured steps, and Harper unlocked the passenger door because refusing at that point would be stupid and useless. He got into the car, closed the door, and suddenly the space was charged with the same electric tension as the first time. "You're a very foolish woman, Harper Mitchell," Kieran said slowly, and there was something dangerous and hot in the tone that made her stomach turn. "Or very brave. I haven't decided which yet." "A man came into the hospital today," Harper said, ignoring his comment and going straight to the point. Liam Brennan. Multiple gunshot wounds. He was calling for you, saying something about the ambush being a trap. The silence that followed was so dense that Harper could hear her own heart beating. Kieran had become completely still, dangerously still, the kind of stillness that precedes explosive violence. And you're telling me this because? His voice was controlled, but Harper caught the underlying tension. Because he was terrified. Because he needs someone to know what happened. And because... She hesitated, then continued. Because I thought you'd want to know he's alive. Critical, but stable. The doctors think he'll survive if there are no complications. Kieran turned to look at her completely, and for the first time, Harper saw something beyond the controlled mask. Relief. Gratitude. And something darker she couldn't identify. You came here, put yourself in danger again, to give me information about one of my men. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Why? Because you helped me when you didn't have to, Harper responded simply. And because, for reasons that probably indicate terrible judgment on my part, I trust you. It was a dangerous and vulnerable admission, and she saw when the words impacted Kieran. Something changed in his face. Some decision being made right there. You shouldn't trust me, he said low. But even saying that, his hand moved to touch her face, rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw with unexpected gentleness. I'm everything your parents warned you to stay away from. My parents abandoned me when I was 12, Harper responded, leaning involuntarily into the touch. So their opinions aren't exactly a priority. The casual confession of trauma made something inside Kieran break and recompose simultaneously. This girl, this future doctor with kind eyes and foolish courage, had survived the kind of childhood that destroyed people, and still chose to save lives instead of destroying them. Still had enough compassion to care about an injured stranger, to risk herself warning him about danger. She was everything he wasn't, everything he had given up being long ago, and he wanted her with an intensity that was completely irrational and absolutely inevitable. Harper. He said her name like promise and warning, leaning closer until their breaths mixed. If I kiss you now, there's no going back. You'll get involved in things you can't understand, with a man who can't offer you anything but danger and complications. Harper looked into the impossible green eyes, at the beautiful and dangerous face inches from hers, and made the most stupid and honest decision of her life. Then kiss me, she whispered, and let's deal with the rest later. Kieran didn't need more invitation. He closed the distance between them, mouth capturing hers with a mixture of brutal control and unexpected gentleness that made Harper moan against his lips. It wasn't a soft or exploratory kiss. It was claim and surrender at the same time, years of loneliness and high guard melting under the impossible heat of a connection neither expected. Kieran's hands held her face as if she were precious and fragile, but his mouth devoured her as if he were starving, and Harper responded with equal intensity, fingers gripping his shirt to pull him closer. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Kieran rested his forehead against hers and laughed low, a rough and genuine sound. You're going to be my ruin, he murmured, and it sounded like a promise. Are you enjoying this so far? Then you can't miss the Dangerous Obsession ebook collection, with intense adult stories that will hook you from beginning to end. It's pinned in the comments and available in the QR code on the screen. The following weeks were the strangest and most intense of Harper's life. During the day, she was an exemplary medical student, attending classes, doing shifts, studying anatomy and pharmacology, until her eyes burned. At night, she entered a completely different world, Kieran O'Malley's world, where rules were fluid and danger was constant. He never exposed her directly to the darker aspects of his business, but Harper was observant enough to fill in the gaps. She saw how hard and armed men spoke to Kieran with absolute respect, mixed with healthy fear. She noticed how he always checked the exits of any place they entered, how he never sat with his back to the door, how he had the unconscious habit of checking the gun hidden at his waist. She noticed the suspicious meetings in restaurants that closed especially for him, the conversations in codes about deliveries and territories, the phone calls in the middle of the night that made him leave quickly with a lethal expression. But she also saw the moments of humanity that Kieran hid from everyone else. The way he personally cared for Liam during recovery, visiting the hospital in disguise, paying all medical bills without the injured man needing to ask. The fierce loyalty with which he treated the people under his protection, ensuring their families were cared for, that no one went without. The sharp and strategic intelligence with which he conducted business, planning 10 steps ahead like a master chess player. And in private moments, just the two of them, Harper discovered a man completely different from the relentless leader the world saw. Kieran was surprisingly gentle with her, as if part of him was constantly worried he would hurt her just by being close. He remembered small details she mentioned casually, showing up with the specific coffee she liked or the medical book she had commented on needing. He listened when she talked about cases at the hospital, asking intelligent questions, genuinely interested even when the topics were completely outside his reality. And the way he touched her, as if she were a precious treasure he didn't deserve but couldn't let go of, made Harper feel things she had never experienced before. But not everything was perfect. There were moments when Kieran disappeared for days without explanation, coming back with colder eyes and restless hands, and Harper knew better than to ask what had happened. There were nights when he woke from nightmares he didn't discuss, body tense and covered in sweat, pushing away her touch until he could recompose the mask of control. There was the constant reality that what they had was impossible and probably temporary, two worlds colliding in a way that couldn't last. A month and a half after that first ride, Harper was studying in the apartment when her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered out of habit. Harper Mitchell? The voice on the other side was male, generic American accent, professional and cold tone. Yes, who is this? Special Agent Marcus Reeves, FBI. I need you to come to our office tomorrow at 10 in the morning. There are some questions about your recent associations that need to be clarified. Harper's heart plummeted to her stomach. FBI. They knew about Kieran. Of course they knew. They were probably investigating him for years. And now she was in the crosshairs by association. About what exactly? She tried to keep her voice steady. We'll discuss in person. It's just an informal conversation at this stage, Miss Mitchell. But I strongly suggest you cooperate. 10 in the morning. Don't be late. The call ended before she could respond. Harper stared at the phone for an indeterminate time, processing the implications. If she went to the FBI, they would have questions she couldn't or didn't want to answer. If she didn't go, she would look guilty of something, potentially putting her medical career at risk before it even began. And whatever she said or didn't say, Kieran would find out that she had been approached by federal authorities. The fragile trust they had built would be tested in impossible ways. She should tell Kieran immediately. It was the right thing to do. Warn him that the FBI was making moves. But part of her hesitated, knowing the man well enough to predict he would take extreme measures to protect her, or to protect himself, and neither option ended well. Harper was still paralyzed by indecision when the apartment door opened, and Kieran walked in. She had given him a key 2 weeks ago, a stupid and inevitable decision, and now he had the habit of showing up unannounced. Usually she loved the surprise. Today, the timing made her stomach turn. He knew immediately something was wrong. Kieran had survived 35 years in a world that killed the careless exactly because he could read people with surgical precision. And Harper, with her expressive face and fundamental honesty, was an open book to him. What happened? It wasn't a casual question. It was a soft but undeniable demand as he closed the distance between them, hands gripping her shoulders, green eyes scanning her face for clues. Harper took a deep breath and made the decision. Honesty. Always honesty. no matter the consequences. FBI just called. They want me to come to their office tomorrow to talk about my recent associations. She saw when the information impacted Kieran. His jaw tightened, muscles tensing, but to his credit, he didn't pull back or let go of Harper. Agent's name? Marcus Reeves. Kieran nodded once, mind clearly already working on the problem. He's been investigating me for 3 years, persistent, incorruptible, annoyingly dedicated, and now he's using you as leverage. There was no accusation in his voice, just a statement of fact, but Harper felt guilt anyway. I didn't say anything. I won't say anything. You know that. I know, Kieran responded immediately, and the absolute certainty in his voice made something warm spread through her chest. He trusted her, completely, without hesitation. But they'll pressure you, Harper. They'll offer you immunity, protection. They'll paint a picture of me as a monster you need to help stop. And they wouldn't be completely wrong. There was something devastatingly honest in the last sentence. Self-recognition that Kieran rarely allowed. Harper reached for his face, forcing him to look at her. You're not a monster. You're complicated and dangerous, and you do things I probably shouldn't accept. But you're not a monster. And I'm not going to betray you for federal agents who don't know me and don't care about me beyond the usefulness I can have. You should, Kieran said low, but even saying that, he pulled her closer, embracing her against his chest as if he could protect her from the entire world. You should cooperate with them. Distance yourself from me. Continue with your beautiful, normal, life-saving people. That was always the logical ending for this, Harper. You and me, we don't make sense. We never did. The words should have hurt, but Harper heard the subtext. He wasn't ending it with her. He was giving her an out, a choice, an option to escape before it was too late. And part of her knew she should accept, should thank the universe for the FBI intervention that would force her to be sensible. But the bigger part, the part that had fallen completely in love with the impossible man holding her, as if she were the only thing of value in his blood-stained life, refused. Doesn't make sense to whom? Harper asked, pulling back just enough to look him in the eyes. To other people? To society? To logic and reason? Maybe not. But it makes sense to me. You make sense to me, Kieran, in ways that nothing in my life ever has. She saw emotion cross his face quickly, vulnerability that disappeared almost instantly, but she had caught it. I'll go to the FBI tomorrow. I'll answer that I know you casually, that you gave me a ride once and fixed my car, that I don't know anything about your business and have no interest in knowing. I'll be the polite and naive medical student who accidentally met someone interesting. Nothing more. They can't force me to testify about things I don't know, and I don't know operational details of what you do. Technically, I'm not lying about that. It was an imperfect plan, full of holes, but it was what she had. Kieran studied her for a long moment, war clearly happening behind the green eyes. Then he made a decision that went against every self-preservation instinct he possessed. Tomorrow, when you go to the FBI, you'll have a lawyer with you. Best criminal defense attorney in Detroit. He'll ensure you don't say anything that could incriminate you or be used against you later. And after that, he took a deep breath. We'll be more careful. No more you coming to my business locations. No more obvious connections that can be traced. If we continue this, and apparently we're stupid enough to continue, we have to be smarter. It was concession and compromise, Kieran choosing to risk his own operational security to protect Harper while still keeping her in his life. It was probably the stupidest thing he had ever done, and Kieran had done many stupid things over the years. But looking at the woman in his arms, at the fierce determination mixed with impossible gentleness, he discovered he couldn't let her go. Not yet. Maybe never. The meeting with the FBI the next day was exactly as uncomfortable as Harper had anticipated. The lawyer Kieran sent was a serious man in his early 50s named David Thornton, with an impeccable reputation and fees that probably cost more than her annual income. He sat next to her in the sterile interrogation room, relaxed posture but sharp eyes, and monitored every word exchanged with surgical precision. Agent Marcus Reeves was exactly what Harper expected. Military-cut graying hair, severe face, rigid posture of someone who had dedicated his life to enforcing the law. He presented photos of her and Kieran, leaving restaurants, entering her apartment, proving extensive surveillance. Miss Mitchell, do you understand that Kieran O'Malley is the target of an active federal investigation? Reeves began, voice controlled but firm. He's suspected of involvement in trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and multiple homicides. Association with him puts you in significant legal and physical danger. My client knows Mr. O'Malley socially, David Thornton interrupted before Harper could respond. She has no knowledge or involvement in any illegal activities of his, alleged or real. Unless you have evidence of criminality on her part, this conversation is over. Reeves ignored the lawyer, maintaining focus on Harper. You're a brilliant medical student with a promising future. Why risk everything for a man like him? Help us build a case, and I guarantee you'll walk away from this without any consequences. You can go back to your normal life. It was a tempting offer, wrapped in a promise of safety and normalcy. And for a second, just 1 second, Harper considered. Then she remembered Kieran holding her the night before, as if she were the only thing stopping him from falling apart completely. She remembered the way he looked at her, as if Harper were an incomprehensible miracle in a life stained with darkness. She remembered that, despite everything, he had been honest with her in ways that demonstrated devastating trust. I have nothing to offer in your investigation, Agent Reeves, Harper said calmly. I know Kieran socially. He's interesting and kind to me. What he does professionally isn't something we discuss, and frankly, it's not my responsibility to investigate the lives of people I know. Unless you have proof I committed a crime, I'd like to leave now. It was a calculated risk, an assertion of boundaries, and she saw frustration pass quickly through Reeves's eyes. But without real evidence of her criminal involvement, he couldn't do anything but let her leave with sinister warnings about consequences of misplaced loyalty. When Harper finally left the federal building, David Thornton at her side, she felt as if she had run a marathon. The lawyer turned to her on the sidewalk, expression slightly less severe. You did well in there. Kept composure, didn't offer additional information, didn't fall for his pressure tactics. Kieran chose well in trusting you. It was a strange compliment, recognition that she had passed some kind of test. Harper just nodded, too tired to analyze the implications. He's waiting for you, David added, indicating a discreet car parked across the street. And Miss Mitchell, be careful. Not just with the FBI, but with your heart. Men like Kieran O'Malley destroy beautiful things without intention, simply by being what they are. The warning echoed in her mind as she crossed the street. Kieran was in the back seat, expression tense until he saw her, then something in him visibly relaxed. She got into the car, and he immediately pulled her into a tight embrace, face buried in her hair. Are you okay? He murmured, hands running over her back as if checking for injuries. I'm fine. They didn't say anything I wasn't expecting, and I didn't give them anything to work with. Harper pulled back to look at him. Your lawyer is intimidating, by the way. Effective, but intimidating. Kieran smiled small. David is the best at what he does. And now the FBI knows you have serious representation, which makes it harder to try to pressure you again. They drove in silence for a few minutes, tension gradually dissipating. Then Kieran spoke again, voice lower. Thank you for not giving me up. You easily could have, and no one would judge you for choosing your safety over a man you've known for less than 2 months. 7 weeks and 3 days, Harper corrected automatically, then blushed when she realized she had admitted she was counting. And you would do the same for me. I know you would. The certainty in her voice made Kieran look at her with something like reverence. Because she was right. He absolutely would do the same. would choose to protect her, even if it meant risk to himself. And the fact that she understood this demonstrated how deeply they had become entangled in an absurdly short time. "I need to show you something," Kieran said suddenly, making a decision. "A place no one else knows about. If we're going to do this for real, if you're going to be in my life despite all the reasons to run, then you deserve to know more than just the surface." It was an offer of vulnerability, an invitation to go deeper, and Harper recognized the weight of it. "Show me," she responded without hesitation. Kieran drove out of the city, beyond the suburbs, to a rural area Harper didn't know existed so close to Detroit. Eventually, they turned onto a dirt road that led to a small cabin hidden among dense trees. It was an isolated place, private, completely disconnected from the world of crime and violence that Kieran inhabited. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. Stone fireplace, simple but comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with books ranging from philosophy to fiction. Harper looked around surprised. This didn't match the image of a relentless Mafia leader. "I bought this place 5 years ago," Kieran explained, watching her reaction. "When I realized I was becoming the kind of man my father was, violent and empty, and I hated it. I wanted to have a place where I could just be Kieran, not O'Malley, not boss, not killer. Just a man trying to remember he was once capable of feeling things beyond anger and ambition." The raw confession cut straight to Harper's heart. She turned to him, seeing for the first time without the layers of protection Kieran normally maintained. "You're still capable," she said softly, "of feeling things. I see it every time you look at me, every time you talk about the people who work for you, every time you think I'm not paying attention but you check if I locked the door or ate anything that day. You're not empty, Kieran. You're just scared of being vulnerable." It was unsolicited psychological analysis, but Harper was a medical student trained in observation, and he had invited her into this part of himself. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he did something that surprised them both. He laughed, genuine and almost incredulous laughter. "How the hell do you do that?" he asked, pulling her against his chest again, that constant need for physical contact he only demonstrated with her. "See through all the lies I tell myself, and just state truths that no one else dares to say." "Special talent," Harper murmured against his chest, feeling the firm and reassuring heartbeat. "Comes with the territory of wanting to understand people instead of judging them." They stayed like that for an indeterminate time, intertwined in the middle of the secret cabin, two impossible worlds finding temporary peace in each other's arms. Eventually, Kieran guided her to the couch, pulled her onto his lap, and began to talk. Not about business or crimes, but about childhood in Dublin, growing up in a family where violence was the primary language and survival required brutal hardness. About coming to America at 20, taking territory through a combination of intelligent strategy and willingness to do what others hesitated to do. About building an empire while part of him died with each moral line crossed. Harper listened without interrupting, absorbing his story, understanding how the man holding her had been created by circumstances and choices that intertwined in ways too complex for simple judgment. When he finally stopped talking, voice hoarse from unexpressed emotion, she turned in his lap to face him directly. "You can't change what you've already done," she said gently but firmly. "And I'm not going to pretend I approve of every decision you've made. But people aren't defined only by their worst moments. You're also the good things you do, the loyalty you demonstrate, the capacity to care that still exists despite everything you tried to kill inside you. And if you let me, I'll keep reminding you of that until you believe it." It was promise and choice, Harper consciously deciding to love the complicated and flawed man in front of her, despite all the logical obstacles. And Kieran, who had built his entire life on distrusting everything and everyone, chose to believe her. The following months established a strange but functional pattern. Harper continued focused on medical studies, excelling in her clinical rotations and impressing supervising residents. Kieran continued managing his business with brutal efficiency, expanding territory and consolidating power. But in the margins of their impossible lives, they created space for each other. Nights at the cabin where the outside world didn't exist. Conversations at 3 a.m. when neither could sleep, sharing fears and dreams they never confessed to anyone else. Stolen moments of normalcy, dining at small restaurants outside the city, watching bad movies and laughing at the scientific illogic that Harper couldn't ignore. And yes, there were conflicts. Moments when their realities collided in ways difficult to reconcile, like the night when Harper arrived at the apartment and found Kieran washing blood that clearly wasn't his from his hands, face closed and distant. She didn't ask for details, knowing he wouldn't share, but the visual evidence of what he was capable of was there between them, impossible to ignore. Or the time when Harper was approached on the street by a rival of Kieran's, who made veiled threats about what happened to people who got involved where they shouldn't, leaving her terrified and questioning if being with Kieran put not just her, but also the people around her in danger. They fought badly that night, Harper accusing Kieran of being selfish for dragging her into his dangerous life. Kieran responding that he had tried to let her go multiple times, but she was the one who insisted on staying. The fight ended with both admitting the difficult truths, that yes, there was danger, and yes, they were probably selfish for continuing together, but neither could give up what they had. 3 months after meeting, Harper was doing a night shift when the emergency room received notification of a massive shooting at a downtown club. Multiple victims arriving simultaneously, medical staff in total trauma mode. Harper was in the middle of the chaos, helping to triage patients, when she recognized one of the tattoos on a critical man being taken to surgery. Irish Clover, one of Kieran's men. Panic hit her like a derailing train. If one of his men was here, there was a chance Kieran was also injured, bleeding, dying in some trauma room where she couldn't see him. She maintained professional composure externally, continuing the work because lives depended on her, but internally she was falling apart. It was the 5 longest hours of her life, treating victims, assisting surgeries, doing everything she could while half her mind was trapped in terror that the next gurney would bring Kieran's body. At 6 a.m, when the influx finally decreased and all critical patients were stabilized or unfortunately beyond help, Harper stumbled out to the hospital parking lot. She was covered in other people's blood, exhausted beyond reason, and shaking in a way she couldn't control. And there, leaning against her car as if he had all the time in the world, was Kieran, whole, uninjured, alive. Harper ran the last few meters and threw herself into his arms, sobbing so violently she couldn't form coherent words. Kieran held her tight, murmuring reassurances in Irish, rocking her gently while letting the accumulated terror flow. I know, he repeated against her hair. I heard about the victims being taken to this hospital, and knew you would be here, thinking the worst. I'm sorry, Harper. Sorry for putting you through that. Were you there? She finally managed to ask, pulling back just enough to visually verify he was really okay. On the periphery when it started, Kieran admitted. I left before it escalated, but I lost 3 men today, and 5 more are in your operating rooms. There was genuine pain in his voice, the weight of responsibility for lost lives. Harper understood then with devastating clarity what it meant to love Kieran O'Malley. It meant living with the constant possibility of loss, of receiving a call in the middle of the night saying he had been killed, of never knowing if each goodbye would be the last. It meant consciously choosing to embrace the fear, because the alternative of living without him was worse. I can't do this, she whispered. But even saying that, she gripped his shirt tighter. I can't go through that again thinking I lost you. Then don't, Kieran responded, framing her face with hands that trembled slightly. End it with me now. Tell me to leave and never come back. I'll respect that, Harper. If you choose your peace and safety, I won't interfere. But it has to be your choice, because I'm too selfish to make the right decision. It was ultimatum and freedom at the same time, Kieran forcing Harper to consciously confront what she wanted versus what was sensible. She looked into the green eyes that had become so familiar, at the face she memorized every night before sleeping, at the man who was disaster and refuge simultaneously. "I love you," Harper said, the words coming out before she could censor them. "And I hate you for making me love you, for being so impossible and so perfect at the same time, for giving me the best and worst of life in an inseparable package. But I can't give you up. I've tried to convince myself mentally 1,000 times that I should, but I can't." It was the first time either of them had said the words, and the impact was seismic. Kieran became completely still for 3 heartbeats, processing. Then he pulled her into a devastating kiss that tasted of desperation and promise and relief, pouring every emotion he didn't know how to express in words into the way he devoured her mouth. "I love you," he said when they finally separated, forehead resting against hers, breaths mixed. "I shouldn't. It's selfish and dangerous and unfair to you. But I love you so completely, it scares me. You're the only good thing in my life, Harper Mitchell. The only reason I wake up and remember I'm still human." They were destroyed and imperfect declarations, said in a hospital parking lot covered in blood and exhaustion. But they were true and real and enough. From that day, something changed between them. No longer just attraction or connection, but conscious commitment to each other despite all the impossibilities. Kieran began including Harper in parts of his life he had kept separate, introducing her to trusted men, not as a secret, but as someone important who should be protected. Harper stopped trying to reconcile the dichotomy of loving someone who did terrible things, accepting that morality wasn't always black and white, that people were complex and contradictory. But reality didn't let romanticism exist in a bubble. The FBI intensified surveillance, becoming increasingly bold. Rivals realized that Kieran had a weakness now, someone he cared about beyond himself, and began making moves to exploit it. And Kieran himself was being pulled deeper into a territorial war that was escalating to violence that could no longer be easily contained. 6 months after meeting, things came to a critical point. Harper was coming back from the university library late at night when she noticed the car following her. It wasn't paranoia. She had learned to recognize the signs in the months with Kieran. She changed routes 3 times, and the car followed every move. When she finally parked in front of the building, 3 men got out of the car and began approaching. Harper grabbed her phone to dial Kieran when one of the men pulled out a gun, gesturing for her to get out of the car. Absolute terror paralyzed her for a critical second. Then medical training took over, the part of her that had learned to function under extreme pressure. She got out slowly, hands raised, assessing options. There were no good ones. The men surrounded her, their leader smiling in a way that made her stomach turn. "Miss Mitchell, what a pleasure to finally meet in person. We've heard so much about you." The accent was Italian, and Harper remembered Kieran mentioning casually weeks ago that there were growing tensions with an Italian family that wanted his territory. "I don't know what you want, but you're not going to kidnap someone on a residential street without consequences," Harper said, voice steadier than she expected. She was betting on witnesses, on cameras, on some divine intervention. The man laughed. "Brave. Kieran chose well. But see, you're exactly what we want. A message he can't ignore that he's not untouchable, that everyone has weaknesses." One of the other men moved to grab her, and Harper acted on pure instinct. She hit the phone into his face with enough force to break his nose, then ran. She had no plan beyond getting into the building where there were neighbors and witnesses. But 3 steps later, something strong grabbed her, an arm wrapping around her waist and pulling her back violently. She screamed, kicked, fought with everything she had, but it was 3 trained men against a 52-kilogram medical student. They were dragging her to the car when gunshots tore through the night. Harper felt the man holding her stagger and let go, falling heavily. More shots, screams, chaos. She threw herself to the ground by instinct, covering her head, trauma processing shutting down everything except survival. Then familiar hands were pulling her, a known voice in her ear. "Harper, it's me. You're okay. You're with me now." Kieran. He had appeared out of nowhere with his own men, transformed the kidnapping attempt into a war zone. Harper clung to him, shaking violently, while he lifted her and practically carried her to the SUV. Around them, his men were dealing with the situation, and Harper deliberately didn't look at the details. Inside the car, Kieran examined her with frantic hands, checking for injuries, and when he confirmed she was physically unharmed, he pulled her into an embrace so tight she could barely breathe. "Sorry, sorry, sorry," he repeated like a broken mantra. "I put you in danger. Should have predicted they would try this. Should have ensured better protection." "How did you know?" Harper managed to ask, voice muffled against his chest. "I've had men doing discreet surveillance on you for weeks," Kieran admitted. "After the threats increased, I couldn't risk it. One of them called me the second the car started following you. I got here as fast as I could, but it wasn't fast enough. You could have been hurt, could have been taken, and it would have been completely my fault." The genuine guilt in his voice, the weight of responsibility he carried, cut through Harper's shock. She pulled back to face him. "It wasn't your fault. It was the fault of the men who tried to kidnap me. You saved me, Kieran. Again." But even saying that, the reality of the situation was settling in. This wasn't going to stop. As long as she was with Kieran, she would be a target, not just an abstract threat, but real and concrete danger. The people who hated him or wanted to harm him would use her as a weapon, and eventually, his protection wouldn't be fast enough, and she would pay the price. Kieran saw the moment when Harper arrived at the same conclusion he had already reached. "You need to leave," he said, voice empty of emotion, mask of cold leader firmly in place because it was the only way to do what needed to be done. "Away from Detroit, away from me. I'll arrange a transfer for you to a medical program in another city, cover all expenses, ensure you can continue your studies without looking back." It was a generous and necessary offer, and Harper should accept, should recognize that the universe was giving her a second chance to have a normal and safe life, should thank him for the intense and impossible experience and move on. Instead, she shook her head stubbornly. "I'm not leaving. You can't force me to give you up by unilateral decision." "I can," Kieran responded, and there was steel in his voice now. "I can put you on a plane tomorrow and ensure you stay away, for your own protection." "And I can come back," Harper challenged. "Every time." "I'll keep coming back, Kieran, because I refuse to let you push me away when it got difficult. You don't make decisions for my life, no matter how well-intentioned. You offer me honest choices about the risks, and I make my own decisions. And I'm deciding to stay." It was an impasse. Two strong wills colliding. Kieran wanted to protect her, even if it meant losing her. Harper wanted autonomy, even if it meant danger. Neither was completely wrong, but neither was completely right either. Finally, Kieran closed his eyes, admitting defeat. "Then we do it the safest way possible. You move out of the apartment today. You'll stay at the cabin where no one knows how to find you. One of my most trusted men is in charge of your security 24 hours. You don't go anywhere without prior checking, and if the situation escalates beyond what I can control, you promise you'll reconsider." They were non-negotiable terms, and Harper recognized that. "I promise," she agreed, because she wasn't being irrational despite what it seemed. She understood that stubborn loyalty had limits when lives were at risk. The following weeks were tense and strange. Harper moved to the cabin, transforming Kieran's secret sanctuary into a permanent residence. She continued her studies remotely as much as possible, traveling to campus only for mandatory classes and rotations, always with a discreet bodyguard named Marcus, who was surprisingly kind for someone who had probably killed more people than she wanted to imagine. Kieran visited whenever he could, but he was clearly distracted, dealing with the consequences of the attack. The territorial war had officially begun, and he was in the middle of it. Harper saw the tension increasing in him, the way he slept less and less, how he checked guns compulsively, how he withdrew emotionally to a cold and calculating place she knew was a survival mechanism. She tried to be supportive, but there were limits to what she could do. She couldn't stop the violence he participated in, couldn't protect him from consequences of choices made years before that were now reaching their peak. All she could do was be present, remind him there was something beyond the war waiting when it ended, if it ended. 2 months after the attack, Harper woke up in the middle of the night and found the bed empty. Kieran had arrived late, exhausted and covered in visible tension, but she had thought he was finally resting. She got up and found him standing on the cabin porch, looking at the dark forest, posture rigid. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her face against his back. Kieran covered her hands with his, but didn't turn. "I'm thinking of sending you away," he admitted. "Not because I want to, but because it's right. This is going to get worse before it gets better, Harper. The rival families are uniting against me. The FBI is using the instability to tighten the investigation, and I'm making increasingly brutal choices to maintain control. You shouldn't be near this. You don't deserve to carry the weight of what I am." Harper tightened the embrace. "We've had this conversation. My choice, remember? And I still choose to stay. Even if it means watching me become a complete monster?" His voice was loaded with self-loathing. "Even if it means waking up one day and realizing that the man you love doesn't exist anymore, was replaced by something unrecognizable." "Do you think I don't see what's happening?" Harper asked gently. "I see you shutting down. I see the darkness taking over. But I also see you fighting against it. I see you still choosing to come here instead of surrendering completely. You have darkness, Kieran, but you also have light. And as long as you're fighting not to completely lose that light, I'll be here reminding you why it's worth fighting." It was an impossible promise, unconditional love that Kieran didn't understand how he had deserved. He finally turned to face her, and in the weak moonlight, Harper saw silent tears running down his face. He made no sound, didn't sob, but he cried with the kind of silent pain of someone who rarely allowed vulnerability. "I don't know how to have this," he confessed, voice broken. "My whole life was about power and control and violence. I don't know how to be a person who deserves love like what you offer." "Then learn with me," Harper whispered, pulling his face down, kissing the salty tears. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to try. And on the days when you can't try, I'll hold you and remind you there's still tomorrow to try again." It was a moment of breaking and recomposing, Kieran allowing himself to be seen completely vulnerable, and Harper proving that her love wasn't conditional on his strength, but embraced the weakness too. They stayed on the porch until dawn, intertwined, silent, simply existing in the shared space. But the world didn't stop for beautiful moments. A week later, things finally exploded. One of Kieran's main lieutenants turned traitor, selling information to rival families in exchange for a promise of power. The betrayal resulted in a coordinated ambush that killed 7 of his men and almost got Kieran too. He survived through a combination of well-trained paranoia and pure luck, but the message was clear. He was losing control, and the vultures were circling. Kieran arrived at the cabin that night covered in blood again, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Cold determination, decision made. "I'm going to end this," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow night, meeting with the heads of the 3 main families. We'll resolve territory once and for all, negotiate truce or go to total war. Either way, it ends." Harper felt icy fear settling in. What if it's a trap? If they plan to eliminate you there? "It's a possibility," Kieran admitted with disturbing calm. "That's why I'm telling you now. If something happens to me, Marcus has instructions. He'll take you out of state, give you a new identity, ensure you stay safe. Enough money to finish medicine and live comfortably. You'll be fine." "I don't want to be fine without you," Harper said, voice trembling. "Don't make me promises about a future where you don't exist, Kieran. Just find a way to come back to me. Promise you'll try." Kieran pulled her close, memorizing the feeling of her in his arms, her smell, the way she fit perfectly against him. "I promise I'll try. You gave me reasons to live beyond just surviving, Harper. I'm not giving that up easily." They spent that night making love with desperate intensity, each touch loaded with the possibility of being the last, each kiss savored like precious treasure. And when Kieran left early in the morning, Harper watched him go with a broken heart but upright posture, refusing to fall apart until he disappeared from view. The next 24 hours were the longest of her life. No news, no updates, just oppressive silence. Marcus remained at the cabin with her, professional and impassive, but Harper saw the tension in him too. Finally, at 11 at night, Marcus's phone rang. Short conversation, monosyllabic, impossible to interpret. He hung up and turned to Harper with an expression she couldn't read. "It's over. Kieran is alive. Situation resolved." Relief so intense her legs failed. Marcus caught her before she fell, helping her to the chair. "Resolved how?" she managed to ask. "Truce negotiated, territories redefined, expensive but functional peace." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Boss played better than they expected. 2 hours later, Kieran arrived. He was exhausted, had a closed cut above his eyebrow, and moved with stiffness that suggested bruised ribs, but he was alive and whole. Harper ran to him, and Kieran caught her, spinning her once before putting her down gently. "It's over," he said, forehead resting against hers. "Not completely, it never really is, but the worst has passed. We can breathe now." "You're injured," Harper said, already in medical mode, checking him with expert hands. "Broken ribs?" "Probably cracked," Kieran admitted. "And before you ask, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. You can take care of me here." It was demand and trust, and Harper nodded. She spent the next hour treating his injuries with medical supplies she had insisted on keeping at the cabin, wrapping the ribs, cleaning minor cuts, giving painkillers. The work of her hands kept her mind focused, preventing her from fully processing how close she had come to losing him. When they finally finished and were lying in bed, bodies carefully intertwined so as not to press on his ribs, Harper let the tears come. She cried silently against his chest, releasing the fear and terror accumulated from months living on the edge. Kieran held her, stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances, letting her process everything she had repressed to be strong. "Sorry," he said when her sobs finally decreased. "Sorry for every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of fear I caused. You deserved better than this." "I deserve you," Harper corrected, looking at him with red but determined eyes. "The real you, with all the complications, and you deserve love that doesn't give up when it gets difficult. So stop apologizing and just stay with me. That's all I want." Kieran studied her face for a long moment, seeing the absolute sincerity, the unshakable strength, the love that continued existing despite everything. And he made a decision he never imagined making. "Marry me," he said, the words coming out certain and clear. "Not because I think you deserve the complications of my life, but because I refuse to spend one more day without the whole world knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Marry me, Harper Mitchell, and let me spend the rest of my life trying to be a man worthy of the love you give me." Harper blinked, processing the completely unexpected proposal. There was no prepared ring, no planned romantic occasion, just two survivors lying in bed after near tragedy, choosing each other with the brutal clarity of near loss. "Yes," she responded without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you, Kieran O'Malley, because I'm crazy enough to want all the complications that come in the package with you." They laughed then, laughter mixed with tears and relief and unexpected joy, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of futures and second chances. In the months that followed, life gradually settled into a new normal. The truce held, tense but functional. The FBI eventually backed off, unable to build a solid case without cooperating witnesses. Kieran slowly began transitioning business to more legitimate operations, not completely, but enough to reduce daily violence. And Harper completed her 3rd year of medicine with honors, already planning a specialization in trauma surgery. Ironically, the same area that had treated so many of Kieran's men. They got married discreetly in a small ceremony at the cabin, only a handful of closest people present. Harper wore a simple dress bought last minute. Kieran wore the only suit he didn't associate with criminal business. And they exchanged vows written by themselves that were too honest and too vulnerable to share with anyone else. "I promise to love you on the days when it's easy, and on the days when it's impossible," Harper said, holding his hands, eyes shining with happy tears. "I promise to see you. Not just what you do, but who you are underneath everything. I promise to be strength when you can't be, and let you be my strength when I need it. And I promise that no matter how complicated it gets, I'll choose you every time." Kieran had to pause several times during his own vows, emotion threatening to overwhelm careful control. "I promise to protect you with everything I am and everything I have. I promise to be honest, even when the truth is ugly, because you deserve nothing less. I promise to try to be better, not perfect because I can't, but better every day because you inspire me. And I promise to love you with every part of me that's still capable of love, and work to recover the parts that forgot how to love." There was no priest or judge, just Marcus serving as unlikely officiant, declaring them married under laws that recognized it or not, because what mattered was the commitment to each other. And when Kieran kissed Harper as his newly declared wife, it was with reverence and passion mixed, gratitude for a second chance he never expected to have. Life after marriage wasn't a fairy tale. There were still challenges, still moments when their worlds collided uncomfortably. But they had a foundation now, a declared commitment that sustained them through the storms. Harper eventually graduated from medicine, top of her class, and began residency in trauma surgery at Detroit's best hospital. Kieran continued managing an empire he was gradually transforming, more legitimate businesses gradually replacing illegal ones, though never completely leaving the shadows. They eventually bought a real house, a place between the isolated cabin and the city, where they could have privacy, but also normalcy. And 3 years after meeting under absurd circumstances on that night in Detroit, Harper held a positive pregnancy test, looking at Kieran with a mixture of terror and joy. "We're going to be parents," she said, voice full of wonder. "We're going to bring a child into this beautiful and impossible mess that is our life." Kieran looked at the test, then at her, and for the second time since meeting, Harper saw him cry openly. But this time they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were of pure hope, possibility of a future he never imagined he could have. "I'll be better," he promised, hands trembling slightly as he touched her still flat belly with reverence. "For this child, I'll be better. Not perfect, but better." "You already are," Harper assured, covering his hands with hers. "And we'll do this together, just like we did everything. You, me, and now one more. Impossible but ours family." And as they stood there, intertwined in the middle of the life they had built against all odds, both knew the road ahead would still have challenges. But they had repeatedly proven that their love was strong enough to survive impossibilities. A food delivery to the wrong address had transformed into the most unlikely love story, and neither would change a single choice that had led them exactly there. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, Consider becoming a channel member to watch exclusive videos we've prepared especially for you, or send a super thanks. Every donation made to the channel will be dedicated to creating new, even more incredible stories. Your participation makes all the difference and helps us bring more and more quality content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next story.